The clock struck 8 in the evening at Westlake University. Most students and teachers had already left for the day. The hallways were quiet except for the soft sound of a mop sliding across the floor and the gentle humming of a woman. Diane Johnson, a 42-year-old black woman with kind eyes and strong hands, cleaned the shiny floors of the arts department. She wore a simple blue uniform with Westlake Maintenance written on the back. Her hair was tied back neatly, and despite being tired after a long day, she still had a small smile on her face. Every night for the past 7 years, Diane had cleaned these halls. She knew every corner, every classroom, and every office. The professors rarely noticed her. To them, she was just the woman who emptied their trash cans and wiped their whiteboards clean. Almost done with this floor, Diane whispered to herself as she pushed her cleaning cart toward the dance studio. This was her favorite room to clean. While other janitors complained about the mirrors being hard to keep spotless, Diane loved this space. The dance studio was large with wooden floors and mirrors covering an entire wall. When no one was around, sometimes Diane would stop and look at herself in those mirrors. Not just as a cleaner, but as the dancer she once was. Tonight was no different. After mopping the floor, Diane stood in the middle of the room. She closed her eyes and remembered her past. 20 years ago, she had been a student at Juilliard, one of the best dance schools in the country. Her teachers had called her gifted. Her future had looked bright. But life had other plans. A bad knee injury during her second year made dancing professionally impossible. Then she found out she was pregnant with her daughter Maya. Dreams of dancing on big stages were replaced by the need to find steady work and provide for her child. No regrets, Diane said softly. She looked at her reflection and stood a little straighter. She was proud of Maya, now studying psychology at a nearby college. All the long nights of cleaning, all the extra shifts, all the sacrifice, it was worth it to see her daughter succeed. Diane glanced at her watch. She still had 3 more rooms to clean before her shift ended at 10. But the empty studio called to her. The silence felt like an invitation. She walked over to the small stereo system in the corner. The dance teachers often left music playing during the day. Diane pressed a button, and soft classical music filled the room. It was Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, her favorite ballet. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, Diane stepped out of her practical work shoes. Her feet, still calloused from years of ballet training, touched the cool wooden floor. The music swelled, and something inside her responded. Her body remembered what to do. She moved to the center of the room and began to dance. Her movements were careful at first, mindful of her old injury. But soon, the music carried her away. For a few precious minutes, she wasn't Diane the janitor, but Diane the dancer. Her arms moved gracefully through the air. Her steps were precise and elegant. Though she wasn't as flexible as she once was, the technical skill was still there. The emotional connection to the music had never left her. In the mirror, Diane saw herself transform. The years melted away as she danced. Tears formed in her eyes, but she kept moving. This private moment was a gift she gave herself after a long day. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't notice the tall figure of Professor Richard Harmon standing in the doorway, watching her with cold, judgmental eyes. The music ended, and Diane's dance came to a close. As she wiped away a tear and turned to get back to work, she finally saw him. Her heart froze. The new head of the arts department had caught her dancing, and the look on his face told her this wasn't going to end well. Professor Richard Harmon was a man who demanded attention. Tall and slim, with silver hair always perfectly combed, he walked through the halls of Westlake University like he owned them. In some ways, he did. As the new head of the arts department, he had power over budgets, classes, and people. At 58 years old, Professor Harmon had spent his life in the world of elite universities. Before coming to Westlake 3 months ago, he had taught at Princeton for 15 years. His office walls were covered with framed degrees, awards, and photos of him with famous artists and politicians. "Good morning, Professor Harmon," said Professor Lisa Chen as she passed him in the hallway. He barely nodded. In his mind, junior professors like Lisa were beneath him. In fact, most people were beneath him. Richard Harmon believed the world was divided into 2 types of people, those who mattered and those who served. "My coffee. Black, no sugar," he said to his teaching assistant without saying please or thank you. The young man hurried away to get it. Everyone knew Professor Harmon did not like to wait. Today was an important day. The university president was coming to see his plans for the upcoming arts festival. This event would show everyone that bringing Richard Harmon to Westlake was the right decision. Everything must be perfect, he muttered to himself as he entered the meeting room. He straightened papers that were already straight. He checked his watch 3 times in 5 minutes. What most people at Westlake didn't know was that Professor Harmon had left Princeton under a dark cloud. There had been complaints about his behavior. Students from certain backgrounds said he treated them differently. Staff members had reported his rudeness. But his connections were strong, and Westlake was eager to have a famous name on their faculty. As he waited for the president, Professor Harmon remembered seeing that janitor dancing in the studio last night. The memory made him frown. He had watched her for almost a minute before she noticed him. Ridiculous, he said out loud, though no one was there to hear. A cleaning woman pretending to be a dancer. What bothered him most was that for a brief moment he had actually been impressed. Her movements showed training, but that couldn't be right. In his world, janitors mopped floors. They didn't dance Swan Lake. The night before, when she had seen him watching, she had stopped immediately. Her face had shown fear and embarrassment. "I'm sorry, sir," she had said quickly, stepping back into her work shoes. "I was just taking a short break. I'll get back to work right away." He had stared at her, enjoying her discomfort. "What's your name?" he had asked. "Diane Johnson, sir. I clean the arts department every evening." "Well, Diane Johnson," he had said with a cold smile, "I didn't know our janitors had such artistic aspirations." She had looked down at the floor. "I used to dance, a long time ago." This had amused him. "Did you now? And where did a janitor learn to dance?" "At the local community center." Her answer had surprised him. "At Juilliard, actually, before my injury." He hadn't believed her. People like her didn't go to Juilliard. She was making things up to seem important. This annoyed him. Now, sitting in the meeting room, Professor Harmon had an idea. The faculty party was coming up next week. Usually these events were boring, but this year he could make it interesting. He would invite the janitor to perform. Everyone would laugh at her pretending to be a real dancer. It would be amusing entertainment and would put her in her place. A little public humiliation would teach her not to lie about Juilliard. The door opened, and the university president walked in. "Richard, good to see you," said President Williams, extending his hand. Professor Harmon stood up and smiled his professional smile. "The pleasure is all mine, sir. I have big plans to discuss with you today." And he did have plans, not just for the arts festival, but now also for a certain janitor who needed to learn her proper place. 2 days had passed since Professor Harmon caught Diane dancing in the studio. She had been careful to do her work quickly and quietly, hoping to avoid him. But luck was not on her side. It was Friday evening. Most of the arts building was empty as Diane pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway. The weekend was coming, and she looked forward to spending time with her daughter Maya, who was visiting from her college. As she turned the corner, she nearly bumped into Professor Harmon. He was standing there as if waiting for her. "Ah, our dancing janitor," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just the person I wanted to see." Diane's heart started beating faster. "Good evening, Professor. Is there a problem with the cleaning?" He shook his head. No, the cleaning is fine. I've been thinking about your performance the other night." Diane looked down at her hands. They were rough from years of cleaning chemicals. Once, these same hands had been a dancer's hands. "I'm sorry about that, sir. It won't happen again," she said quietly. Professor Harmon laughed. "But that's exactly what I want to talk about. We're having our annual faculty party next Friday evening. Quite an important event. The university president will be there, along with all the important professors and donors." Diane nodded, wondering where this was going. Usually, she and the other cleaning staff were asked to work extra hours before such events, but were never invited to attend. "I've decided we need some entertainment," Professor Harmon continued. "And I thought, why not showcase our multi-talented staff?" A cold feeling spread through Diane's stomach. She didn't like where this was heading. "I don't understand, sir." His smile grew wider. "It's simple. I want you to dance at our party. Show everyone your Juilliard training." He said the word Juilliard like it was a joke. Diane stood straighter. I don't think that would be appropriate, Professor. Not appropriate. His voice hardened. I'm offering you a chance to perform, and you're refusing. Perhaps you don't value your job here as much as I thought. The threat was clear. Dance for his amusement or risk losing her job, the job that paid for Maya's college, the job that kept a roof over their heads. What would you want me to perform? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Professor Harmon looked pleased. Something cultural. You know, something lively that shows your natural rhythm. I'm sure you people have plenty of dances that would entertain us. Diane felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. She knew exactly what he meant. He didn't want to see ballet or modern dance. He wanted her to perform a stereotype for his amusement. I trained in classical ballet and contemporary dance, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He waved his hand dismissively. Whatever you choose, just make it entertaining. The party starts at 7 p.m. next Friday in the Grand Hall. Be ready to perform by 8:30. He started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and wear something colorful, not that drab uniform. After he left, Diane leaned against the wall, feeling tears threatening to spill. The humiliation burned inside her. He didn't believe she had trained at Juilliard. He saw her only as a stereotype, not as a person with real talent and a real past. For a moment, she considered quitting. But then she thought of Maya and all the sacrifices she had made to give her daughter a better future. As she continued her cleaning rounds, anger replaced her tears. Who was he to judge her? Who was he to mock her past and her dreams? By the time her shift ended that night, Diane had made a decision. She would dance at the party, but not the way Professor Harmon expected. She would show him and everyone else exactly who she was and what she could do. This wouldn't be a humiliation. It would be her comeback. Diane sat at her small kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold. The yellow walls of her apartment, once bright and cheerful, now seemed to close in around her. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, reminding her that time was passing, and she needed to make a choice. The confrontation with Professor Harmon kept playing in her mind. His smug face, his dismissive tone, the way he had said "you people" as if she was somehow less human than him. The front door opened and Maya walked in. At 20 years old, Maya was the best thing in Diane's life. Smart, determined, and kind, she was everything Diane had hoped her daughter would become. Mom, are you okay? Maya put down her backpack and sat across from Diane at the table. You look upset. Diane tried to smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. But Maya knew her mother too well. Something happened at work, didn't it? She reached across and took Diane's hand. Tell me. The whole story came pouring out. Diane told Maya about being caught dancing, about Professor Harmon's demand that she perform at the faculty party, about the thinly veiled racism and the threat to her job. That's harassment. Maya's eyes flashed with anger. You need to report him to HR. Diane shook her head. It's not that simple, Maya. Professor Harmon is powerful. He has connections. I'm just a janitor. You're not just anything, Mom. Maya squeezed her hand. You were good enough for Juilliard. You had a real future before your injury and before me. Diane looked up sharply. Don't ever think that. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I've never regretted choosing you over dancing. Then don't let this man make you feel small. Maya stood up and paced around their small kitchen. You should file a complaint. The university has policies against this kind of behavior. But Diane knew how these things often went. The complaint would be filed. There would be meetings and questions. And in the end, Professor Harmon would likely get a warning while she would be labeled a troublemaker. She might keep her job, but the environment would become even more difficult. There's another option, Diane said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. What's that? I could dance. Maya looked confused. What? You mean actually do what he wants? Diane stood up and walked to a small closet in the hallway. From the back, she pulled out an old dance bag she hadn't opened in years. Inside was a pair of worn ballet shoes, some leotards, and photographs from her days at Juilliard. Not what he wants, Diane said, a new strength in her voice. What I want. He expects me to make a fool of myself, to dance some stereotype that matches what he thinks of me. She pulled out a photo of herself in a beautiful white costume, her body forming a perfect arabesque. But I was good, Maya, really good. before my knee gave out. Maya looked at the photo of her young mother, amazed at the grace and power captured in the image. You want to show him up? Diane nodded. I have 1 week. My knee isn't what it was, but I still remember everything. I can still dance. For the first time since the confrontation, Diane felt something other than shame or anger. She felt purpose. She would dance not for Professor Harmon's amusement, but for herself, to reclaim something precious that she'd put aside. It won't be easy, Maya warned. Your knee. I know. Diane touched the old injury. It had healed long ago, it was never quite the same, but some things are worth the pain. She looked out the small apartment window at the night sky. I won't let him define me. I won't dance what he expects. I'll show him and everyone at that party who I really am. Maya smiled and hugged her mother. Then let's get started. We have a week to prepare your comeback. 5 days before the faculty party, Diane's small living room looked very different. The old sofa was pushed against the wall. The coffee table was in the hallway. A small portable bar, borrowed from a community dance studio, stood in the center of the room. Diane stood in front of the TV, which showed a dance video she had found online. She wore black leggings and a simple t-shirt. Her feet were bare as she moved through a series of stretches. Careful with that knee, Maya said from the kitchen doorway. She was holding an ice pack wrapped in a towel. Diane nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in her right knee. Years ago, a bad landing from a jump had torn her ligaments. The doctors had done their best, but they told her a professional dance career was no longer possible. Now, that old injury reminded her of its presence with every deep bend. I'll be fine, she said, taking the ice pack from Maya. I just need to warm up properly and not push too hard. For the next hour, Diane worked through basic movements. Each step brought back memories of her training. Her body remembered what to do, even after all these years. Ballet was like that. Once the technique was in your muscles, it never fully left. What music will you use? Maya asked, watching her mother move with growing confidence. Diane had thought about this carefully, something unexpected, something powerful. She walked over to her laptop and played a piece that mixed classical music with modern beats. As the music filled the room, Diane began to dance. Not full out yet, but marking the movements, planning the choreography. She would start with classical technique to show her training, then move into more contemporary expressions that spoke to her personal journey. Mom, that's beautiful, Maya said, her eyes wide. But can you do all this in just 5 days? With your knee? Diane smiled. I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be true. She took a deep breath. And I need a costume. Together, they went to Diane's bedroom closet. In the back was a garment bag that hadn't been opened in years. Inside was a simple but elegant black leotard with a flowing skirt attached. I wore this for my final performance at Juilliard, Diane explained, running her fingers over the fabric. Before my injury. The costume needed work. It was dated and slightly yellowed from age, but the bones of something beautiful were there. I can fix this, Maya said, examining the seams. My roommate is an art major. She can help us add some color and details to make it special. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Diane continued cleaning at the university during the day, careful to avoid Professor Harmon. Evenings were dedicated to practice. Every night, her knee hurt more, but she pushed through the pain. Maya's roommate, Zoe, came over with fabric paints and beads. Together, they transformed the old costume into something new. They added hints of blue and purple that shimmered when Diane moved. They sewed small crystals along the neckline. It represents water, Zoe explained as they worked. Always changing, always flowing, but with hidden depths and strength. 3 days before the party, Diane practiced in the full costume for the first time. As she danced, she caught glimpses of herself in the mirror they had set up. The woman reflected back was not just a janitor. She was an artist, a dancer, someone with dignity and power. On the final evening before the performance, Diane ran through her dance one last time. Her movements were strong and deliberate. Her face showed determination. Maya recorded the practice on her phone. When it was over, she played it back so Diane could see. They won't know what hit them, Maya said with pride. Diane nodded, feeling ready. Tomorrow night, Professor Harmon would learn that she was much more than what he had assumed. The Grand Hall of Westlake University glowed with soft light from crystal chandeliers. Men in dark suits and women in elegant dresses stood in small groups, holding wine glasses and making polite conversation. Classical music played quietly in the background. Professor Harmon moved confidently through the crowd. He shook hands, laughed at jokes, and made sure everyone noticed his expensive watch and perfectly tailored suit. Tonight was his night to shine. "Richard, wonderful party," said President Williams, patting him on the back. "The arts department is in good hands with you." Professor Harmon smiled. "Thank you, sir. And wait until you see the special entertainment I've arranged." His eyes scanned the room, looking for the janitor. He had mentioned to several professors that there would be an interesting cultural performance tonight. He expected her to wear something bright and flashy, to attempt some kind of dance that would make everyone laugh politely while feeling sorry for her. But Diane was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she lost her nerve, he thought with satisfaction. Smart of her to realize she would only embarrass herself. At 8:25 p.m., Professor Harmon tapped a spoon against his glass. The room quieted as people turned to look at him. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues," he began with a wide smile, "I promise you something special tonight, a little cultural entertainment." He looked around one more time for Diane, ready to announce that unfortunately the performer must have changed her mind. But just then, the main doors opened. Diane Johnson stood in the doorway, and the room fell silent. She was not what anyone expected. Instead of bright colors or casual clothes, she wore a fitted black leotard with a flowing skirt that shimmered with blue and purple when she moved. Her hair was pulled back neatly, with a few crystals that caught the light. Her posture was perfect, straight back, chin up, shoulders relaxed. "Is that the janitor?" someone whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Diane walked into the room with grace and confidence. She moved like a dancer, each step deliberate and poised. Professor Harmon's smug smile faltered. "Ah, here she is," he said, trying to maintain control. "Diane Johnson, one of our cleaning staff, has offered to entertain us with a dance tonight." Polite applause filled the room, but Diane could see the confusion on people's faces. They looked at her, then at each other. They had expected something to laugh at. Instead, they saw a woman who carried herself like a professional. "Thank you, Professor Harmon, for this opportunity," Diane said clearly. Her voice was calm and dignified. "Before I begin, I'd like to tell you that I studied dance at Juilliard for 2 years before an injury ended my professional career." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Professor Harmon's face reddened. "She's lying," he said under his breath to a colleague, trying to make herself sound important. "The piece I'll perform tonight," Diane continued, "combines classical ballet with contemporary movement. It tells the story of someone who faces judgment but refuses to be defined by others' assumptions." She nodded to Maya, who stood by the sound system. The music began, powerful and moving, not at all what Professor Harmon had expected. Diane took her position in the center of the open space that had been cleared for her. She stood still for a moment, eyes closed, gathering herself. The room was completely silent. Then she began to dance. From the first movement, it was clear that Diane was not just an amateur with delusions. Her technique was precise, her lines clean and beautiful. Years of training showed in every gesture. Professor Harmon's confident smile disappeared completely. His plan was falling apart before his eyes. This was not the embarrassing spectacle he had counted on. This was art. And everyone in the room could see it. The music filled the grand hall as Diane began to dance. Her first movements were pure classical ballet, precise and controlled. Her arms formed perfect lines, her turns were steady, and her jumps, though not as high as in her youth, showed years of training. Professor Harmon stood frozen, his wineglass tight in his hand. This was not the awkward display he had expected. The janitor who cleaned his office was dancing with skill that only came from serious training. "She really did go to Juilliard," whispered Lisa Chen, a young professor standing next to him. "Look at her technique." The crowd watched in silence. Many had never seen ballet up close before. They could not name the steps or recognize the difficulty, but they could feel the beauty and emotion in Diane's movements. As the music changed, so did Diane's dance. She moved from strict ballet into more contemporary forms. Her body told a story of struggle and strength, of being pushed down and rising again, of dignity in the face of shame. In the back of the room, Maya watched her mother with tears in her eyes. She had always known her mother was special, but tonight everyone else could see it too. Diane felt her knee protest as she moved into a deep lunge, but she pushed through the pain. This moment was worth it. With each step, she shed the identity of just a janitor and reclaimed her true self, an artist, a dancer, a woman of substance and grace. For 5 full minutes, she owned the room. The party guests were completely under her spell. Some had tears in their eyes. Others watched with their mouths slightly open in surprise. No one spoke. No one moved. They only watched. Except for Professor Harmon. His face had turned from surprise to disbelief to something else, a reluctant recognition. The woman he had tried to humiliate was showing more talent and training than many of the dance students in his own department. Near the end of her performance, Diane's knee sent a sharp pain up her leg. For a moment, she faltered. Those who knew dance could see the brief misstep, the flash of pain that crossed her face. Professor Harmon thought this would be the moment when she failed. But instead, Diane incorporated the stumble into her dance. She used it as part of her story, showing how pain could be transformed into art, how weakness could become strength. As the music built to its final notes, Diane executed a perfect series of turns. Her costume caught the light, the blues and purples shimmering like water. She ended in a pose of quiet strength, one arm raised high, her chin lifted, her eyes looking forward. Then, silence. The music stopped. Diane held her final pose, breathing hard. For one terrible moment, no one reacted. Diane's heart pounded in her chest. Had she misjudged? Had her dance not been good enough? Then President Williams began to clap, slowly at first, then faster. One by one, others joined in. The applause grew louder and louder until it filled the entire hall. "Bravo," someone called out. "Incredible," said another voice. Soon people were on their feet. A standing ovation for the university janitor who had just shown them what true art looked like. Maya rushed forward to hug her mother. "You did it," she whispered. "You were amazing." Diane smiled, feeling tears in her eyes. For years, she had been invisible to these people. They had walked past her in hallways without seeing her. They had left messes for her to clean without thinking about the person who would do the work. Now they saw her, really saw her. Professor Harmon remained where he stood, not clapping, his face unreadable. His plan had backfired completely. He had meant to mock her. Instead, he had given her a stage to shine. 1 week after the faculty party, Diane was cleaning the arts department as usual, but everything felt different now. Professors who had never noticed her before stopped to say hello. Students smiled and nodded when she passed. Word of her performance had spread quickly throughout the university. Someone had recorded it on their phone, and the video was shared among students and staff. People who watched it were amazed that the woman mopping their floors had such extraordinary talent. As Diane emptied a trash can in the hallway, Professor Lisa Chen approached her. "Diane, do you have a moment?" she asked kindly. "Of course, Professor," Diane said, setting her cleaning supplies aside. "I've been wanting to talk to you since the party," Lisa said. "Your dancing was beautiful. I teach music history, but I've always loved dance. The way you moved, it was like watching poetry." Diane smiled. "Thank you. It felt good to dance again after so many years." "I heard about what happened," Lisa continued, her voice lower. "About how Professor Harmon tried to embarrass you. Several faculty members have filed complaints about his behavior." This surprised Diane. She had not expected anyone to stand up for her. "The dean called him into a meeting yesterday," Lisa added. "I don't know everything that was said, but Professor Harmon has been required to attend diversity training, and he's on probation for the rest of the semester." Diane nodded, unsure how to respond. She had not sought punishment for Professor Harmon. She had only wanted to show her dignity and talent. "There's something else," Lisa said, smiling now. "Dean Roberts would like to meet with you today at 3 p.m. Can you make it?" Later that afternoon, Diane sat nervously in the dean's office. Dean Roberts was a kind-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair and bright eyes. "Diane, thank you for coming," she said warmly. "I want to apologize for what happened at the party. Professor Harmon's behavior was completely unacceptable. Thank you, Diane said simply. But that's not the only reason I wanted to see you, the dean continued. Your performance showed extraordinary talent and training. Several people told me you studied at Juilliard. Diane nodded. For 2 years, before my knee injury. Well, we have a proposal for you, Dean Roberts said. Our department offers dance classes for non-major students. Basic classes for beginners who want to learn for fun or exercise. We're looking for a part-time instructor, and after seeing your performance, I believe you would be perfect. Diane's heart beat faster. You want me to teach dance? Yes, the position pays more than your current job, and the hours would be more regular. You would still be part of the university staff, but as faculty instead of maintenance. Tears filled Diane's eyes. After 20 years of cleaning floors and emptying trash, she was being offered a chance to return to dance, to share her knowledge and passion with others. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes. Dean Roberts smiled. You have a gift, Diane, and our students would benefit from your experience. That evening, Diane and Maya celebrated in their small apartment. The video of Diane's performance had now spread beyond the university. Local news stations wanted to interview her. A community arts center had called about possible workshops. I'm so proud of you, Mom, Maya said, hugging her tightly. As they sat together looking at the official offer letter from the university, Diane thought about the strange journey that had led to this moment. Professor Harmon had tried to mock her, to make her a spectacle. Instead, his cruelty had opened a door that had been closed for 20 years. Sometimes, she told Maya, people try to put you in a box based on what they see on the outside. But that doesn't define who you really are or what you can do. Diane Johnson, once invisible as she cleaned the university halls, would now walk those same halls as a teacher, her dignity and talent recognized at last.